Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives for the first session 2020-2021, 12th Parliament, on the consideration of proposals for the supplementation and variation of appropriation for the fiscal year 2021. Madam Speaker, just before I came to the podium, Member for Pointe-a-Pierre raised an issue. On my way to Parliament today, I checked with the Budgets Division to ensure that the responses to questions emanating from the first meeting of the Finance Committee of the 2021 session would in fact be delivered to the Parliament at 1:30 or before. And I was advised that a very unfortunate incident in the Budget Division, a medical emergency, which caused difficulties, and the Budget Division was unable to prepare the documents within the required time. However, I'm very pleased to report that just as I came to the podium here, one of the attendants handed me the document, and I have with me the responses to questions. So as soon as I have finished, I will circulate this document. Now, Madam Speaker,
Speaker, just interjection. Could the Minister stand down until we are able to look at what his response is?
Ron, if you'll have to allow your friend, if your friend will allow you, if it's an interjection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I said, I just got it a minute ago. There was a medical emergency. These things are not planned. And fortunately, I hope whoever had that emergency in the ministry is being taken care of and getting the best possible attention that they can get. Madam Speaker, the motion before us is to debate the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives on the consideration of proposals for the supplementation and variation of appropriation for fiscal year 2021. Now, I have printed that document. It's 175 pages long. It contains in it the verbatim account of the committee, the various matters raised, the questions asked, the responses given, and a little bacchanal too. And the issues that we are about with respect to the variation of appropriation and supplementation, I think, have been very well ventilated. And in view of the fact that I just have 45 minutes, I will ask members to refer to the notes that were submitted for the Standing Finance Committee rather than having to go through every single supplementation of the several heads of expenditure. What I would like to say at the outset, Madam Speaker, is that we ask for this supplementation against the backdrop of the performance of the economy for the period October 1st to May, June, October 1st, 2020 to May, June 2021. And I think it's necessary to put things into perspective. Today, I asked the Ministry of Energy to give me their most up-to-date information on some very important data. And I can share with this Parliament that I have been advised by the Ministry of Energy that the weighted average price for this financial year from October 2020 to April 2021, the weighted average price of local crude is $52.76. So it is above the budget figure of $45. And I think we're all very clear on the price of WTI and Brent as of June. These figures that I have received are up to the end of April. So up to the end of April, the weighted average price of local crude oil was $52.76 US per barrel. So oil price is performing better than projected. With respect to production, I am advised that the average oil production for the period October 2020 to May 2021 was of the order of 58,000 barrels per day. In fact, 57,889. So a little below the projected production at the budget time in October of 2020. With respect to gas production, I have seen the figures up to May, and what I'm seeing is that gas production has been in the range from 2.6 billion standard cubic feet per day, rising to 3 billion standard cubic feet per day, and dropping back down to 2.77 billion cubic feet per day in March, 2.56 billion in April, and 2.5 in May. So that the budget production figure that was used was of the order of 3.2 billion standard cubic feet per day, and therefore we are somewhat below that in terms of production, the country that is. With respect to the netback price of gas, what I have been told is that the price has varied from $2.34 in October of 2020, rising to $3 in April 2021. And if you looked at the price of the Henry Hub price today, you would have seen for the last couple of days or so, it has been above $3. But on average, the netback price of gas has been lower than estimated in the budget. So natural gas production is below the forecast. Natural gas prices are below the forecast. Oil prices are significantly above the forecast, whereas oil production is a little bit below. But since we in Trinidad and Tobago get the majority of our revenue from petroleum, from natural gas, of the order of 2/3 of our revenue, and sometimes more, comes from natural gas, and just 1/3 or less comes from oil. The lower production of natural gas and the lower prices of natural gas have affected us significantly. So if I go now to the outturn, the fiscal outturn, in terms of what has happened in the first 8 months or so of the fiscal year, what we are seeing is that there has been a significant reduction in revenue, primarily from the natural gas sector. And if I give some details now, we had expected the income from oil companies, taxes on incomes and profits, by the end of April to be somewhere in the vicinity of $1.3 billion, and it is in fact 900 million. So there's been a shortfall there of about $400 million. That is taxes on incomes and profits from the oil companies. With respect to other companies, they're not doing so badly. We had expected income of about 3.1 billion, and we've received 3.0 billion. So we had a shortfall there of about $100 million. With respect to income from individuals, taxation from individuals, we had projected that by the end of April we would have 3.5 billion in taxation from individuals, and we got 3.48. So that the taxation from individuals is almost where it is supposed to be in terms of our original projections. But all in all, when you add up the effect, and this is primarily with oil companies, it is profoundly affected by COVID-19. One of our major suppliers, in fact, the major producer of natural gas, BP, has had significant problems with the delivery of infrastructure platforms to Trinidad and Tobago to maintain the supply of gas. They had contracted companies in Mexico to build their platforms, and Mexico has been on a prolonged lockdown. And as a result, a number of items have not arrived in Trinidad in order to maintain gas production platforms and so on. So that all in all, we've had a reduction in terms of taxes on incomes and profits from oil companies, other corporations, and withholding tax, business levy, and so on, all affected by the situation in the energy sector of some $500 million. In terms of royalties, this is where there has been a significant shortfall, where we had anticipated that by the end of April 2021, we would have received $2.9 billion in royalties on oil and gas, and royalties is a function of production and price. So simple as that. We have a 12.5% royalty regime on oil and gas production. And we had anticipated that by the end of April, we would have received $2.9 billion in royalties on oil and gas. However, the actual receipts are 1.1. So royalties, there's been a significant shortfall there of the order of $800 million. In terms of extraordinary revenue from oil and gas companies, you will recall, Madam Speaker, that based on negotiations by the Honourable Prime Minister and his team, going to the major oil companies that do business in Trinidad and Tobago, such as Shell, BP, BHP, etc., that there had been an agreement that we would get additional revenue from oil and gas companies, but it is all tied to price. And because the price of gas is suppressed, and because production is suppressed, the extraordinary revenue from oil and gas companies is short by some $230 million. So all in all, in terms of income from royalties and income from extraordinary revenue from oil and gas companies, we're short by over $1 billion. So that the fiscal out turn up to April, Madam Speaker, there has been a shortfall of approximately $2.5 billion. Now, I already reported this, figures similar to this some months ago in a press conference at the ministry, just to keep people abreast of what was happening. And the main shortfall I want to stress is in the energy sector. In terms of how we are dealing with it, we are here today to deal with a supplemental appropriation. What we had sought to do at the beginning of the year was to reduce expenditure from the range of 50 to 51 billion down to about 48 billion. And we had anticipated that we could do that based on certain projects and programs getting to the point where there would be less dependency on the Treasury. The Water and Sewerage Authority is a case in point. And if you look at the report of the Finance Committee and you look at the documents submitted for the Finance Committee, you will see that there's a considerable supplementation that is being requested for the Ministry of Public Utilities. And the bulk of that would be to support the Water and Sewerage Authority. We had hoped that we'd be a little further along in terms of reducing the dependence of the Water and Sewerage Authority on taxpayers. It costs taxpayers in excess of $2 billion a year, and we had hoped that we'd be a little further along, but for various reasons, we are not there yet, but I am very hopeful, and we are very hopeful, that we will get there, that we will be able to reduce WASA's dependence on the Treasury. I'd also like to speak in some general terms, Madam Speaker, as to why we are here doing what we are doing. Because these supplementations, we are of the view these are inescapable. We need to do these supplementations to ensure that salaries and wages are paid on time, that essential goods and services are provided, particularly in the health sector, which is our #1 priority in terms of providing funding to the health sector. And within the matters before us today, Madam Speaker, you would see a supplementation for the Ministry of Health in the order of 267 million, but that is not all, because we also assist the Ministry of Health in terms of their procurement of pharmaceuticals by way of loans which are taken by NIBDEC with a government guarantee and therefore become a contingent liability. So even though you would see 267 million here, where we are asking for that additional sum to be appropriated, and the details are in the document, and it is an important area, so even though the matters are there, and we had quite a discussion on them on Monday, I would like to return to the situation with the Ministry of Health and to point out that contained within that $267 million is a significant sum for our ambulance service. There are arrears owed to the ambulance provider, and the reason for that is that this is for additional trips, and whenever there are additional trips outside of the original provision for ambulance service, these things have to be audited. So that the Ministry of Health has been in an audit situation now for quite a while to make sure that the government is not being charged for trips that were not made, and that the amounts due to the ambulance service are indeed required. We're also supplementing funding for the regional health authorities, because we recognize that they are in the front line of the health response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore we must provide appropriate funding for the RHAs. There is an amount here within the 267 million of $86 million broken down across the various RHAs, with the bulk of the funding, $34 million, going to the North Central RHA, in which the Couva Hospital is located, as well as the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. So that we have been very, very careful to provide the Ministry of Health with whatever funding required. And may I also say, Madam Speaker, that we in the Ministry of Finance, we have at any time that it is required that the Ministry of Health requires funding, for example, for vaccine purchases, we in the Ministry of Finance, we have used our own allocation to ensure that payments are made on time to ensure supply of vaccines. And I can give some global information. I would not want to go into details, as the Minister of Health pointed out in response to a question just before the session began, or before this debate began. There are non-disclosure agreements, so we can't give detailed information. But I can say at this time that so far the Ministry of Finance has made arrangements or already spent US $10.3 million, or 70.2 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars, on the procurement of vaccines. And the balance to be paid with the current arrangements for the procurement of vaccines is US $5.4 million. If you add that all up, we expect at the end of the day that we would spend approximately US $15.7 million on the acquisition of vaccines, or approximately 107 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars. And I can give some global figures. As I said, I can't get into any details, but that $107 million will allow vaccination of 85% of the population, or approximately 1.2 million persons. And I wish to say that we've already paid for a significant quantity of vaccines, and we've also made the necessary down payments for the vaccines to come, especially the vaccines that are coming from the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust, or AVAT is the acronym. So that, I don't know if that clears the air on how much money is being spent on vaccines. I want to repeat, $107 million and sufficient vaccines to vaccinate 1.2 million people, which it is not my portfolio, but at 85% of the population, I think we would certainly be able to achieve over time the objective of the Ministry of Health of herd immunity. I also want to deal with some issues that are in the public domain. As I was coming to this parliament, I was listening to the radio and I heard one of the local commentators that talk from time to time. And this commentator was saying we should go to the IMF for money. And then saying, no, we shouldn't go to the IMF for money. We should go to them for technical assistance. And that we should stop borrowing. And that we should make structural adjustments to the economy. I just want to clear this all up. Countries only approach the International Monetary Fund when they run out of foreign exchange and they can't service their foreign debt. That, Madam Speaker, is Economics 101. Additionally, whenever the IMF is approached for financial assistance, either you have to commit to a structural adjustment program or you have to get into a structural adjustment program. And therefore, since our reserves are still in the vicinity of $7 billion US, more or less, and our Heritage and Stabilization Fund is still in the vicinity of $5.7 billion US, more or less, we have more than sufficient foreign exchange at this point in time, and therefore there's absolutely no reason for us to go to the IMF for financial assistance. None whatsoever. And I do wish that local economists would not just say these things because it sounds nice. With respect to technical assistance, we interface with the IMF on a regular basis for technical assistance. In fact, we had a meeting just a month ago where we asked the IMF to assist us with a number of fiscal and monetary matters, and that these are ongoing technical assistance programs of the IMF, so we don't need to be told to do that. With respect to borrowing, if we stop borrowing, then we cannot finance the fiscal deficit. We cannot do the supplementation that we are about today. We can't pay salaries. We can't finance education. And certainly we cannot finance health care and provide water and electricity to our citizens at current rates. So a recommendation that we should stop borrowing is ludicrous. And we are certainly not going to make structural adjustments, such as retrenchment, removal of subsidies, and devaluation at this time. Certainly not. And I heard a very curious question with respect to a loan that we have negotiated with the government of the Republic of China in the amount of approximately $200 million US. And the question was, what are the conditionalities associated with that loan? Very curious question. There are none. And people who ask these questions should know better than just throw that mischief out into the public domain. So coming back now to the matter at hand, Madam Speaker, let me just give you some indication of what we are doing and will be doing with the supplementation. We've already indicated, and I want to reiterate, that we are supplementing the Ministry of Agriculture with $57 million to allow the Ministry of Agriculture to continue a very innovative and significant program, and that is the food basket program, which is costing that ministry approximately $11 million a month. And we have made the decision to appropriate enough funding to allow that ministry to provide its 25,000 food baskets per month for the next 5 months, right up to the end of the fiscal year in September 2021. So that $57 million that is being appropriated for the Ministry of Agriculture is specifically to deal with the provision of these food boxes, as I said, some 25,000 food boxes per month. Significant achievement. At the end of the fiscal year, if all goes according to plan, the Ministry of Agriculture would be able to supply over 100,000 food baskets to needy citizens by way of members of parliament, and in addition to assist over 100 farmers in terms of giving them guaranteed sales for their produce. So it's a very, very innovative program, and it has backward linkages. Not only does it provide relief to poor and needy people during this pandemic period, but it also stimulates agricultural production. So it is a very interesting and a very forward-looking program. With respect to the appropriations that are being made for other forms of COVID relief, we are asking the Parliament to appropriate $40 million to the Ministry of Social Development for their income support grant program. And from all the reports I have, that $40 million should be sufficient. And I heard some confusion today about food cards and so on. I want to remind members opposite that the appropriation for conditional cash support, which is a technical term for food cards, is in the Ministry of Finance. And therefore, we in the Ministry of Finance, at the appropriate time, we had always said that we would start off with the COVID-19 relief for 2021 with the food baskets from the Ministry of Agriculture. That is up and running and doing very well, notwithstanding whatever noise members opposite are making about it. It's an excellent program, and I want to compliment the Ministry of Agriculture for that program. So the food basket program is up and running, and we had always indicated that as soon as that food basket program was in full swing, we could turn our attention to some additional food cards during the remaining period of fiscal 2021, and that arrangement will be settled between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Social Development within the next month or so. I would not want to give details at this point in time, but we're certainly going to make available. We have a block allocation in the Ministry of Finance in fiscal 2021 of $250 million for various forms of COVID relief. We have already appropriated some of that to the Ministry of Social Development for income support. We will be utilizing some of it in the Ministry of Finance for our salary relief grant, and we'd also be allocating part of that $250 million towards additional food cards, which will be distributed in the usual manner. I can give some information on the salary relief grant, which is a fully online e-portal developed at the Ministry of Finance, developed in 7 days. I want to compliment the staff in the Ministry of Finance for being able to do this in 7 days, to create and launch a completely digital solution with respect to applications for the salary relief grant. And I can give some information that we already have, as of the 4th of June, 19,030 applications submitted for a salary relief grant, and 10,937 applications in progress still to be completed. So we're looking there at about 30,000 applications for the salary relief grant, and we have about 35,000 persons indicated an intention to apply for the grant. When we look at the breakdown of the applications, the bulk of them are in the food and restaurant services sector. About 15,000 of the 30,000 are in that sector, and 13,500 are in the retail outlet sector. So between retail outlets and food and restaurant services, that's over 28,000. The vast majority of applications are in those two sectors, with small amounts elsewhere. If you assume, because the grant is a two-tiered grant, $1,500 for those who lost employment at the beginning of May, and $1,000 for those who lost employment from the 8th of May. There were evolving adjustments to the public health regulations, and that's why we have the two-tiered approach. let's average it out at $1,200 dollars per person. And if you take 30,000 persons, assuming all are genuine, because quite a few will not be, they would not be eligible, but let's assume they all are. You take 1,200 by 30,000, you'll get about $36 million for the month of May. And I can say now, because of the prolonged period of COVID-19, we would be looking at what can be done in the month of June. The figures are not yet worked out, but I think we would have to do something in the month of June. And as I said, we have a block allocation for all COVID relief of $250 million. Might I also say, to our surprise, that although we're talking about 30,000 odd applications for the salary relief grant, and this is just the Ministry of Finance grant, not the social development grant. Those details, I'm sure, will be given by the Minister of Social Development in due course. That we were quite surprised to see that 119,620 visitors came to the Ministry of Finance e-portal for salary grants in the 2-week period between the middle of May and the end of May. Almost 120,000 persons visited our portal, and out of that would come about 30,000 applications. Could I find out how much more time I have, Madam Speaker?
Your time expires at 3:04:32.
Okay, so about 13 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Let me also speak about the Small and Medium Enterprise Loan Facility. In talking to the banks, we found, and this bears repeating, although this is already in the public domain, it bears repeating that the banks have told us that significant number of applicants could not qualify for the Small and Medium Enterprise Loan, even though that loan is a zero interest loan. I want to repeat, zero interest loan facility, moratorium for 2 years. The government pays the interest. The government guarantees 75% of the loan. Even with all of that, the majority of persons who indicated an interest in that loan could not qualify. And they could not qualify for very basic reasons. They didn't have audited financials. They didn't even have management accounts. They were not up to date with VAT. They were not up to date with national insurance. They were not up to date with income tax. However, they still wanted to get a loan facility. And it is really a reflection on a level of indiscipline among the small and medium enterprise sector, that they are running businesses on a day-to-day basis, on a cash basis, without any proper planning, without any accounting. And we, as government, we must assist these people. Then we must do something about it. This cannot continue, that situation. So I have consulted with the central bank, and we are going to develop a program where we can have an outreach program to small and medium enterprises to see how we can assist them and get them to understand that one of the basic things that a business requires is proper accounting. Because if you cannot demonstrate to a bank, you're going for a loan, but you cannot demonstrate to the bank what your income and expenditure is, and whether there's any surplus, and whether you have the capacity to borrow money, then no bank is going to lend you money. So we are trying to assist. We're trying to see what we could do. Perhaps we can relax the requirement that the tax documentation can be pre-COVID up to, say, January or March of 2020, because we realize that people have difficulties. So perhaps we can look at that. This is something we're discussing with the banks to see whether, if persons were up to date with their documentation before COVID, that perhaps that could be looked at. In addition, we are looking at increasing the guarantee from 75% to 100% to see if that would assist persons. But beyond that, we can't have a situation where persons would want to approach the banking sector for loans and have no accounts. That can't work. So we'll have to see what we could do working with the central bank and see how we could assist these enterprises to at least have the very minimum of management accounts. I can also report that the matter has gone to Cabinet, and Cabinet has agreed we shall extend this program to the end of December 2021. We've done the same for the credit union program. We are extending it to the end of December 2021 and looking to see what we could do to make it easier for people to access these funds. In terms of the grant program that the National Enterprise Development Company, NEDCO, is doing, again, we are going to work with NEDCO and see what we could do to make it easier for people to access the grants from that program. But we in the Ministry of Finance, Madam Speaker, we get all sorts of requests that make no sense. Just today, I received a document from a local businessman with recommendations on how to deal with the economic issues within the pandemic. And the recommendations were, fine $5 billion, share it up among the population, and waive taxes for the next 2 to 5 years. Now, those recommendations don't make any sense, because in the first place, asking the government to find $5 billion, we'll have to borrow. Remember, they have one leading economist telling us, don't borrow. But of course, if you have to find $5 billion to just share out, you have to borrow. And then the businessman says, don't collect taxes for the next 2 to 5 years. So where on earth is the money going to come from? And there's a lot of that going on in Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of that, where persons are asking the government to forego revenue collection and asking the government to provide financial assistance. Unlike the United States, and I think this is necessary to make this point, the US dollar is what is called a reserve currency. It is held by 70% of all of the banks in the world. They hold in reserve US dollars. So 70% of all currency held in reserve by various banks throughout the world is in US dollars. The next most desired reserve currency is the euro. And after that, the British pound and the yen and so on. What the United States can do we cannot do. The president can go to Congress. He can ask Congress to approve a $2 trillion stimulus package, which happened with 2 presidents. President Trump did it, President Biden did it. And then once Congress approves, they just tell the US Mint, open up and print. We can't do that. We do not have a reserve currency. Our Trinidad and Tobago dollar is not held by central banks around the world or by commercial banks around the world. We cannot simply call our treasury and say print. But the United States can. And they've been doing that since the Great Depression in 1929. That's how they've been dealing with their issues. They just print more and more US dollars. And because it's in demand, because the US dollar is in demand, there's no issue with it. The Euro region has also relaxed all of its fiscal rules during this pandemic and is doing the same thing. But we in Trinidad cannot do that. We have to watch our debt to GDP ratio. We have to look at our overdraft in the central bank, which is prescribed by law. We have to look at our essential and mandatory expenditure. We have to look at revenue, and we have to try and walk a tightrope of maintaining the momentum in the economy, maintaining as much employment as we possibly can, maintaining as much business activity as we possibly can, while not running afoul of the legal constraints with respect to expenditure. Those other countries don't have those constraints. So I want to make that absolutely crystal clear. Now, coming back to the matter at hand, Madam Speaker, we are forecasting as we go down into the year that the overall shortfall in revenue for the fiscal year will be somewhere in the vicinity of $5 billion. We are looking at this supplementation We expect that we will have to spend most of it. So that if you take that 3 billion, more or less, and the 5, we are looking at an unplanned event in the vicinity of $8 billion. But we will only know at the end of the year what the outcome is. But I want to make the point that we think that this supplementation is absolutely necessary. When you look at what it is for, it is not frivolous. When you look at the allocations, for example, to the Ministry of Local Government, we are giving supplementary funding to the 14 municipal corporations in the sum of $94 million for payment of wages and salaries to make sure that they can maintain their staff, as well as sums owed for the provision of goods and services so that they can meet the various payments that they have. If we look at the supplementation for the Ministry of Works and Transport, a lot of outstanding matters that have to be dealt with, like obligations to the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission. Because what we have been fighting for this last several years is trying to do our best to work within the constraints that exist. And therefore, there are situations where ministries owe statutory authorities and service providers like TSTT, TNTech, etc., owe them significant sums. They owe landlords money for rental accommodation and contractors funding for projects already completed and so on. With respect to the police service, and with a few minutes left, Madam Speaker, I just want to reiterate a point. We are appropriating or seeking appropriation for an additional $57 million for the police service. We have a loan which has already been executed, money already deposited in an escrow account of $200 million. And the police already had an original allocation for goods and services. This is all goods and services. This is for supplies. This is for the rental of vehicles. This is for service providers to the police service. This is for their equipment, their weapons, etc., etc., etc. $200 million by way of loan, $57 million by way of supplementary appropriation, and they already had over $300 million in their original appropriation. When you add that all up, you get close to $600 million for the police service for fiscal 2021, of which there is no doubt somewhere in the vicinity of $150, $200 million will go to pay previous bills, but that will clear them off so that the police service, if all goes according to plan, will have had available to it after it clears its liabilities almost $400 million for goods and services for fiscal 2021 if this is approved. And therefore, I want to put to rest the old talk about underfunding of the police service. That's nonsense. I want to repeat that with all that we are doing, the police service will get almost $600 million for goods and services this year. And when you take the $200 million for past bills, they would have available to them some $400 million for 2021, which is a significant sum. And therefore, Madam Speaker, as I said, the details of the supplementation are contained within the very comprehensive report of the Standing Finance Committee, the 175-page report. As I indicated, I got the responses to the questions. I'll just take a quick look at them and then give them to the clerk for circulation. And I beg to move, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, I will now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives for the first session 2020-2021, 12th Parliament on the consideration of proposals for the supplementation and various